Evening. The March 31st, 2020 Lynchburg City School Board work session is called to order. Due to the COVID-19 pandemic, we ask that everyone in the boardroom and lobby practice social distancing by sitting at least 6 feet from one another and covering your mouth when you cough or sneeze. Would you please stand for the pledge? I pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
The first item of business is the approval of the agenda.
Move for the approval of the agenda.
Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. Dr. Coleman, Ms. Carter, any discussion? All in favor? Aye. When we go to the electronic participation, I will be doing roll call vote so that,
Okay.
yes.
Can I just ask when you make a motion or second that you speak up so that Christy can hear you?
Gotcha. Okay. Do we need to do them again?
She's saying Christy's talking. She's trying to say something.
I didn't get who seconded the motion.
Ms. Carter.
Ms. Carter, it was a motion by Dr. Coleman and seconded by Ms. Carter.
Thank you.
That now takes us to the first item on the agenda, the electronic participation in the board meeting. The superintendent recommends approving the participation of those attending this meeting remotely based on our policy BDD, which allows for electronic participation in meetings. We have 3 members, Dr. Gupta, Dr. Brennan, and Dr. Sinha, who are requesting to join this meeting electronically. Is there a motion to support this participation?
I move that we allow the electronic.
Ms. Carter made the motion. Is there?
I'll second.
Dr. Nilles, second. Any discussion? All in favor? Aye. You are now able to, the 3 remote board members are now able to join in the board meeting and participate in voting. Now that takes us to the item 2 on our agenda, the budget presentation, fiscal year 2020-21 school operating budget. Dr. Edwards.
Yes. Can you hear me, virtual participants? Yes. Okay, great. You all should have a copy of the proposed budget either on your table. It was emailed electronically to the virtual participants. It is also available for the public that's listening on the public domain of Board Docs. So you should be able to get a copy and follow along. And for purposes of both having a physical quorum and having virtual participants, we did number the pages so that it's easy to follow and reference with that. But before I get started on the budget, I'd just like to publicly thank the school board, my entire staff, and all of the community and volunteers for the past couple weeks of really helping address the concerns that have raised, helping us feed our kids, give out learning packets. It has been a tremendous effort during this time, and I just want to say kudos to the whole community and to my staff and to the board for their support as we continue to take this new journey. Tonight we're going to be brief because we want to abide by both social distancing and really keeping as many people home as possible. So for the first part of the budget, what I am going to ask is I'm going to have Kim kind of go over the revenue and expenditures. For those of you who were in the Finance Committee meeting on March 10th, we have provided you with the numbers at that time. These numbers are slightly adjusted due to some activity that was in the General Assembly. But Kim's going to take you through the first couple pages so that you get a good understanding of what our projected revenue is and our projected expenditures. And I will say, for the purpose of this meeting, this is the pre-COVID-19 budget. So this is the budget based on what was in place before this pandemic, we do recognize that we may have to go back and revisit this budget depending upon things that occur, but for purposes of just moving forward, we were given the advice by the state superintendent to present the budget as is, and to move forward with that, with the understanding that we may be making some adjustments. So the projected revenue and everything that we talk about tonight is very proposed and very pre-COVID-19. Okay, Ms. Lakonich.
Dr. Edwards stated that in the Finance Committee meeting, we did present numbers based off the December 17th calc tool from the state. And so these numbers have changed because on March 13th, we did get new numbers. And also, initially, the guidance was that we had to have the 3% increase in year 2 of the budget. And now that has changed, where they're stating that we have to do a 2% in year 1. So you will see that from their revenue side, the first sheet you have on page number 2 is just your summary. That gives you your summary of your state revenue, your federal revenue, the miscellaneous, the other category, and then the local funds. The state, initially, when we had met back at the Finance Committee meeting, the state revenue was up 3.2 million. Now you're seeing it at 3.9 million. That difference of 695,000, 676,000 of that is money that they gave to assist with the SOQ funded positions for that 2%. So that was what it is for the change. The remainder did not change as far as from that meeting, but I know a lot of you hadn't been in there. But if you look at page 3, 4, and 5, those are the details that support the summary page. And if you have any questions, I'll try to answer those. The one thing I did want to point out that we had discussed at great length at the committee meeting was that the local match piece that the locality has to put in had gone up 1.9 million, and that we were asking for the same funding as prior years. So we were going to absorb that within our own budget. With this latest calculation, the local match is up 2.3 million, and we're still able to work within our budget, tightening in some areas to be able to not request that from the city. So I just wanted to point that out. If you have any questions on the revenue, I'll try to answer.
Do we have any questions on the revenue pages?
Okay, on the expenditure side, that is going to be your page 6, 7, and 8. What these numbers reflect are the pay schedule advancement for all pay schedules. So we had put in place the new pay schedules, and everybody is moving up a step. It doesn't mean necessarily because of that odd even years, it doesn't mean that everybody's getting an increase. So with that 2% requirement from the state, there is an additional 1% that is rolled up into the teacher pay scale. So everybody is advanced up per the pay schedules that were approved by the board, and this reflects the teacher pay schedule getting another 1% on top, so that we would meet that if that stays the course from the state. You also notice that under the benefits in every major category, you'll see an increase. You're seeing that because the VRS rates did go up. Our professional percentage went from 15.68 to 16.62, plus same with group life and retiree health. They had a small increase. Majority of that increase is us moving back to the employer's portion of the health insurance contribution being what it was in 1819.
So we're increasing what we're
Yes, ma'am.
providing.
So that's why you're going to see a lot of that in every major category, because we were putting that funding back to where it was, so that we aren't having the situation, similar concerns that we had this year. Other things I wanted to point out is that you'll see under administration, the non-personnel costs, you'll see that there's a lot of negatives from as far as a decrease. Those are where we were pushing those expenditures out to the school levels. So that's just another thing I wanted to point out, and also that we shifted the technology to the IT. So when you see under the technology section where it looks like they received a lot more money, It's just that we wanted to have all the technology, the software in one location where it can be overseen, because it's all throughout the school division. So that's where that increase came from.
Could you explain the rationale for moving the money to the schools? I understand it, but others may not.
Yeah, so in the past, we at the central office level have had funding here to pay for a lot of the school expenses. So for example, all of the science kits are purchased from the central office rather than the schools. And one of the things that we were having difficulty seeing is how much money is spent in each school on each content area, how much money is spent on gifted education, how much money is spent on math and science. And that was an equity thing. We could do it by doing line items to try to figure out from the central office. But if we really want to get a picture of adequate spending and make sure that we're doing not only adequate but equitable spending and putting money where the needs were, we decided to decentralize a lot of the expenditures here and move them to the schools. One in my office, I paid for all of the principals to go to the principal conference. But it would be nice to see that allocation for the building so I can see which building administrators are actually attending the conference if we ever get where we have to alternate to make sure that it's not always the same building administrators and that we're making sure that we equitably fund that. So you will see some decreases, particularly in curriculum and instruction, some out of my office that we're funding the schools.
Anyone else have, Ms. Carter?
Although it's decentralized, will we still get them in a centralized manner, like the science kits and all?
Yes, we'll still order them and get the bulk discount, but what we'll do is make sure that we're appropriately charging them to each school so that we can have an idea of how much we're allocating for that school.
Dr. Nellis?
So with regard to shifting the costs to the appropriate centers, you look at the purchase services for technology, that's quite a bit bigger.
That's the software, because it's online. That goes to a purchase service, a 3,000 account.
And
That's one we centralized to make sure that we had, and that was an equity issue to make sure that we had software that was being used throughout every classroom, school, and that we didn't run afoul with having some software here but not there in terms of the instructional part. We also moved all of our operational software. I gave some to Amy. Board docs, we actually put, instead of putting in the board, we put it in the technology budget. It was probably one of the only ones that we centralized up instead of the other way around.
Right, and that the Department of Education gave us guidance because they made a change where you actually have to report the expenditures at the school level. And so instructional expenses, I mean, there's no direct instruction in this building, so it really needs to be out at the school location. Technology is still viewed as a district expenditure, so that's why it was okay for us to put it back into that one area.
Dr. Nellis?
can you provide some more details on the increases for under the instruction for purchase services, the internal services, and the materials and supplies?
Sure, and some of that you're going to see when I get to the second part that talks about what we're actually looking at in this budget, and you can see some of the increases. And just to give you an example, one of the increases would be in field trips. So we put some more field trip money in the schools to allow the schools to connect their field trips to their curriculum program. So you'll see some increases in that area as well. But I will get to more specifics on the second half of this presentation.
Dr. Gupta has a question.
Dr. Gupta?
I have two questions. I know last year we committed to creating living wages as we move with the budget. So I'd like to hear the administration views in terms of this current budget. Do we have any move to move it to the next level for living wages for our employees?
So last year, we established in December a living wage at $11.28 an hour, and we moved most of our pay tables, our pay scales up to living wage. The area that we did not address was some areas with substitute positions which when I get to the second part of this, we'll talk about substitute positions, but we'll also talk about minimum wage and some other complications that occur with that. So we did move everyone up to the minimum, the living wage last year, and those folks are going to move up another step this year with the salary increase. So the positions that we're most still looking at in terms of just living wage are a couple substitute positions, which I have outlined in the second half of this presentation.
Dr. Gupta, you had a second question?
Yes, ma'am. In terms of mental health counselors, could you please talk about what this budget is doing and how many more mental health counselors you're planning to hire?
Okay.
School by school basis or division overall?
And again, in the second half of this, it talks about the specifics in terms of just, I would say, counseling and behavioral support as opposed to just mental health counselors. We have school counselors, we have behavioral coaches, we have social workers, because we recognize that all of that personnel plays into the support for our students. But I will go over that on the second half of the budget when I identify the specifics for each and where they are per school.
Any more questions? All right, Dr. Edwards.
Okay, so we are now on page 9 of this document. And what I did on page 9 was just kind of give you some highlights from the General Assembly that met in March, just right before the COVID pandemic and the shutting down of our schools. And I picked out a couple things, a couple highlights that are in that General Assembly discussion and the conference budget, but I also wanted to explain what that means for LCS so that folks have a better understanding. Sometimes when they see you get $3.9 million, they say, you have money to pay for everything you need, and they may not realize that there are stipulations to some of that money. There are people that we're supposed to have attached to some of that money. So I do want to go through this page just real quickly. As Kim mentioned, the salary increase is an average of 2% for this year, and the funding that we're getting, the proposed funding that we're getting from the state is 2% for SOQ funded positions. And we've had this conversation in previous years that every position and every staff member is not an SOQ funded position, and that even in order to accept the money, that LCS has to come up with the average of 2% for the rest of the employees. So again, if we want to take that money and use it to adjust our salary scales, we also have to have a plan for adjusting the pay for the positions that are not SOQ funded. And I just want to mention that we have been able to balance our budget and do that with our request to the city for flat funding, the funding that we've received for the last couple years. So that additional 2% to bring the rest of our staff up, we are not asking the city for any additional money above the flat funding that they've given us in the prior year. It's covered in there. There were a couple other things that I just wanted to point out that are in the bill, and they are specific to staff ratios and movement toward having increased ELL staff positions and a decreased counselor load. So again, when you see some of the funding, and you may be misled to think that it's funding to just do what you want, but it's actually funding to reduce counselor load. So one of the things that we did with the counseling funding is we added a second counselor at R.S. Payne. R.S. Payne has about somewhere over 500 students. Sandusky Middle School has about over 500 students. R.S. Payne has one guidance counselor. Sandusky Middle has 2. And the ratio that we're trying to get to is 325 students per counselor. Now that's kind of difficult to do when you're in a school that might have 399 students or 265 students, because we have a counselor in every single school. So it doesn't work out as neatly as the math suggests, but again, these are areas where we need to be mindful of the money that we're receiving comes with stipulations. There were some additional funds in our budget for VPI and pre-K and access to pre-K for 3- and 4-year-olds. And again, one of our proposals you'll see is to add 2 additional pre-K classes at Perrymont. And with those 2 additional classes, in addition to the materials and resource, we have to add 2 teachers and 2 assistants. So the money that we receive for that part of it can't be used to increase, for salary increases, because it's used in part to fund the staff there. And then down on the bottom, some of the other proposals that didn't come with any money attached, but I like to say they came with a warning. If you look at minimum wage, which was currently $7.25 an hour, and you can see that minimum wage is going up over the next couple years. Now, fortunately for us, we did a lot with living wage last year, so it doesn't affect us as bad as it could have if we had not made those adjustments. But we are going to get to, by 2026, 2025, $13.50 and $15 an hour. And right now, some of the things that we propose to at least address this is to look at the hourly rates for substitute assistants, substitute teachers, substitute custodians, and substitute secretaries, and make sure that we are above at least the minimum wage as we approach living wage, is what we wanted to do with there. And again, we are not asking for any additional funding above flat funding from the city to get this done. We have figured out within our existing budget, pending all revenue, how to make that happen. But I thought that that would be good for you guys to have a highlight of some of the things and be able to explain how some of those dollars are attached to people and requirements. So any questions on page 9?
Just want to note that page 9 is reflective of several years of seeking to work at this, and so this is good information to see the development.
Ms. Carter?
I know you were talking about increases. Will that also help with the compression when we did the living wage? There are a lot of salaries were compressed, or several. Have we been able to really work on that to try to decompress some of those?
We have not done too much with decompressing what we compressed due to living wage, so you still will see several steps where there's compression.
Dr. Brennan?
Yes, Dr. Edwards, I may have missed this when we talked about the revenues and expenses, but looking at this page number 9, which I think is a wonderful proposal, particularly the idea that we have to match the non-SOQ funded positions, and also increasing hourly rates for some substitute positions. I know that you've mentioned, and you may have said this in more detail before that I just couldn't hear because of the audio, but that seems like a large amount of money, and that is coming from central office distributing funds into smaller schools, or can you help me a little bit with where that money is coming from to provide those extra amount within our own budget we currently have, so we don't have to ask for more from the city?
When we developed our plan last year, maybe even 2 years ago at this point, when we wanted to reinstate the pay scales, we recognized that meant that staff would increase and have a salary increase each year. And with that, we also instituted a very detailed and thorough budget process where we're looking at our expenditures and really tightening our belt and making sure that we are allocating money to needs and not just rolling money over in the same categories year after year. So part of what we did in planning last year and even this year is trying to forecast how long we think within our existing budget, if we stayed flat, could we manage the salaries? And I think even last year I said, we probably have about 2 to 3 years, and Dr. Coleman, I'm looking at you because you always say, is this sustainable? And I always say, no, at some point we are going to either need new revenue or start cutting people. So we've done a good job of looking at some of our funding, and particularly where you have staff that have retired, that you have a little bit of attrition, you make a decision, do you still need that position? Can you repurpose that position, or does that position help with the salary increases? So we have really done a good job this year going person by person by person. We also looked at in previous years where we may have had contingencies and we didn't necessarily fill those contingencies. So we looked at that as well. And then later, I'm gonna talk a little bit about what we did in terms of the bus drivers and the bus driver vacancies as well, so you can get an idea of how we were able to increase bus driver positions by our bus driver positions and salaries and giving them VRS benefits by looking at all of the vacancies that we've been carrying year after year after year due to the bus driver shortage.
Any more questions? Ms. Carter?
Can you just remind us of what positions are not SOQ funded? Sometimes people get.
Yeah, that gets to be tricky. And the state changes the SOQ label. So every time I try to do a year-to-year comparison, they've moved folks from different positions. So I'll give you an example. The elementary assistant principals would be a good example of there is a position that is not SOQ funded. And we have 11 elementary, 11? No, not 11. We have 11 elementary schools. We have 6 elementary assistant principals that aren't funded through the SOQ. And then some of our classified positions are not SOQ funded. Most of them are tied to instruction, the SOQ funded positions. And I don't know off the top of my head, without looking at my numbers from our staffing, what percentage of our staff, but it's a significant percentage of our staff that's non-SOQ funded that we have to come up for salaries. I don't know if you wanted to jump in there, Kim, and add. Okay.
Dr. Nellis, did you have a question? Thank you. Okay.
Okay, moving on to page 10, and what we tried to do was for the board, for the public, and for our staff to kind of put out a document that shows, you know, you see the revenue, you see the expenditures, and you know that we haven't increased the budget in terms of our what we're asking for from the city. But what's actually in the budget that this $42 billion plus the state funding covers? So the top of page 10 is kind of just another summary of what Kim shared with you. There's a graph that shows that, you know, we get 57% of our revenue from the state, and it breaks down some other areas. But then when you get to the bottom, what we attempted to do was align the things that we put in the budget as our budget priorities with our strategic plan goals. And I'm not going to go through all of these, but I do want to hit the major ones, especially for the public that's listening. So the first goal under goal 1, which is student growth and development, there are several objectives under that goal, 1.6 being program and services. And this one is probably one that is most tied to the things that you might be hearing sometimes when our staff come to talk to you, or things that we've talked about within the division. The first is providing additional special education support at our alternative programs. One of the things that we noticed at Fort Hill and Family Insight is we have all types of kids who would benefit from those alternative programs, and some of those kids have IEPs. And we were not in a position where we could fully support children who had IEPs and also required an alternative program. So that's one of the things that we wanted to do going forward, is provide some additional support for those 2 programs. You heard me talk about field trips and external learning experiences, which kind of right now during the COVID time is not what we want to talk about, but pre-COVID, we did talk about the benefit of children having these outside experiences that are tied to their curriculum, and we provided some support for that. Last year, you got to see a wonderful video of the 8th graders on the James River. That's one of the programs that we actually built into the budget, so that it was grant funded last year, and we love our grant partners and we appreciate them, but I'm sure they don't think that they're supposed to fund every single program every single year. So we moved money from central office, decentralized a little bit, to give the schools more field trip money so that we could have more of these experiences. At the high school level, we are growing in terms of our need for sections in art and world language at Heritage. So you can see there's some funding to provide extra sections for that. And across the division, you heard me say this earlier last year, that we really want to boost our art, music, orchestra, drama, movement ed, and library media programs. And we did a little bit of that this year with the all-school third grade RS Payne production that we had. But each of the schools is committed to developing the arts. There is a good connection of the arts to the academics, so we want to definitely support both. Additionally, if you look down the second bullet from the end, we're talking about additional special education support for pre-K during the summer. During the summer is the time when we meet our pre-K babies. We do our intake of them. We have some 3-year-olds, we have some 4-year-olds, and we need some support in really identifying the challenges, the needs, and whether or not students need modifications, IEPs, and so on and so forth. So we wanted to make sure we had staff available during the summer so we can start our babies off right. And then the last bullet is the 2 additional VPI classrooms at Perrymont. And again, I talked about that being the additional funding that was provided. There's an increase at DESI for more Spanish time. We're proposing hiring a part-time athletic trainer at EC Glass because of the number of children who are participating in sports, and we were fortunate to get a new field as well, so that's great. Looking at the numbers at Sheffield, we are going to need another elementary teacher. Right now, it looks like that might be in first grade, and that's after looking at whether or not we could shift personnel. We did as much shifting of teachers as possible, and we still may need an elementary teacher. When we had our budget hearing or our public input in the fall, one of the things that the parents had mentioned, students had mentioned, and some board members was, could we get additional spots at the governor's school? So we did put in the budget to have 2 additional 11th grade spots, which the following year will be 2 11th and 2 12th grade spots. So it's 2 spots this year. It will turn into 4 spots next year. We did a repurpose of a world language position to provide some support at the Empowerment Academy as we looked at the numbers. And again, looking at the numbers for our criminal justice program, and there was another phenomenal video about that program. More kids are taking it, so we want to provide additional sections and move it from a part-time to full-time at both high schools. And also offering some additional CTE offerings for our kids who attend the Empowerment Academy and who may not be able to travel back and forth to take electives. We want to make sure that they have a robust elective option there. And then the last thing was to hire an educational interpreter, and that's being driven by a student's IEP, so we have to do that. There are a couple other things that I just want to quickly go over that our staff in particular have brought to our attention. And this is in the area of the social-emotional and behavioral support. So we did put in here to hire 2 full-time elementary behavioral coaches. We had 3 this year at the middle schools that were really helping in terms of both working with teachers and working with students and families. And we want 2 additional at the elementary schools to share between T.C. Miller and DESI, and then Bass and SES. Those happen to be 4 buildings that don't have an assistant principal in those buildings, so having the behavior coach support would be helpful there. RS Payne also does, RS Payne, Paul Monroe also does not have an assistant principal, but they currently have a student support position, which is why we did not add a behavioral coach there in case someone asks. You'll see the additional counselor we talked about at RS Payne. A social worker for the division. Our social workers have been wonderful, especially during this time, during the COVID, and making sure that we check in on our students and their families. We do have 2 cars that our social workers used constantly to help families get back and forth. We have a behavioral support position, a BCBA position that was in the budget. This is one of those ones that was unfilled, and we just could not find a certified behavioral analyst, but we didn't want to give up, so we wanted to continue to have that position as a valuable resource. And then something outside of the box that Dr. Copeland and I had talked about and worked on, when we saw the change in Medicaid and how students were being approved or not approved for services for day treatment, we saw a drop in the number of kids receiving day treatment. And there really wasn't much we could do because it was dependent on Medicaid. So we came up with a creative non-Medicaid dependent idea that what if we could buy our own slots, so to speak, or contract with Family Insight, and those would be LCS slots that aren't Medicaid dependent, but our kids would still get their needs met. And if during the time that they're being evaluated, they will be accepted, then that opens up a slot for another kid. So that's something that we carved a little money aside because we recognize that that's something that our children need and our teachers have been telling us. And then finally, positive behavioral supports and character ed. We did give the school counselors some extra money to work on and work with children on positive behavior and character ed and building those good social skills so that we do see less behavioral problems and behavioral challenges that we may see. The rest of the document, the rest of page 11 and page 12 are also tied to our goals, somewhat some of the recruitment goals. You can see, obviously, the biggest thing is to do the salary increases and provide the local match, which at the time was about $1.9 million, to also make those salary adjustments for those positions that are still under living wage and in some cases barely above minimum wage. We did make some adjustments to our middle school principal salaries. If you look at our current pay tables, middle school principals and elementary principals are on the exact same pay table. So we did some separation to make that middle school position a little bit more attractive for middle school people. We did make some changes in our secretarial staff. We needed an additional secretary at one of our larger elementary schools at Heritage, and at least having a secretary available 12 months. One of the things we want is for our families to have that access, particularly when they're trying to register their kids, to have someone there to help out. And then there are a couple other things on there related to talent and the school board with board docs. We put money aside to make sure we can continue with that. The finance and facilities and enrollment management software, which is a software that will help us look at demographics as we look at where are our children, how are we assigning them to schools. And I know this will be very helpful as we move forward, particularly with the city school task force. A few things for facilities, but I do want to take you down to transportation, because that is another area where we felt like we had to use some creative strategies. We've talked for years about the school bus driver shortage across the country, and we've had open positions for school bus drivers for quite some time, and we just have not been able to fill them. Part of the challenge with that is we want these open positions because we want people to come, but at the end of the year, we have all this money from open positions that we were hoping people would come from, plus the benefits, and that rolls over into a large fund balance. So it's a tricky problem to have, that you want to recruit and you want to have salary for if you can recruit, but you also don't want to have large fund balances at the end of the year because you did not expend the salary. So we looked at our bus driver assignments, and one of the things that we wanted to do was repurpose some of our 6 and 7 hour bus driver positions to increase the number of 8-hour bus driver positions. And I had shared a schedule with you previously. I did not bring it today, I should have. But what this will do, the difference between a 6-hour and an 8-hour bus driver position is the 8-hour position, in addition to making a higher pay, higher hourly rate, they also qualify for VRS benefits, which is something that they have not done if you're a 6-hour bus driver position. If you've ever been to the staff appreciation, staff retirement party that we have at the end of the year, which we're not having this year, at least not live, one of the things that I noticed is that when I'm talking about people who have been here for 20 years and 25 years and 30 years, often those are our transportation folks. They stay with us for a very long time, and many of them did not have access to VRS. So that's one of the things that we wanted to put in place. We also shifted the schedule so that we would have blocks of time where 3 hours in the morning, that's our pickup and drop off, 3 hours in the afternoon, that's drop off, and then we had 2-hour windows to cover transportation or transporting students in the middle of the day, between schools, to internships, all over the place. There's a lot of activity that goes on in midday. but also a 2-hour block after school for our after-school programs and our athletics and any other programs that we have after school. So we made that adjustment. We were able to pay for the 8 hours by downshifting some of the vacant positions that we just kept holding year after year after year. We still have some, because we still want bus drivers, but we did make that adjustment, and that helped us pay for that. And that includes going up to the higher scale and the raise that follows the next year. So those are the big items that are in this budget. And again, this is all done with the request for flat funding from the city. So a lot of work was done in retooling, repurposing, and reallocating funds.
Questions? Dr. Coleman?
Yes, Dr. Edwards, recognizing our pursuit of flat funding from the city and other monies being in place, we recognize that some of the challenges with discipline have been presented to us in recent meetings. Do you believe that in the category that you have for student wellness and quality of life, if not 1/6 as well, with the current director and whatever staff that we have there, do we need anyone to assist us with training as it relates to the implementation and usage of restorative justice practices?
Yeah, we have that built in with our existing staff. One of the things that we started this year was looking at our professional development rather than what professional development is the curriculum department giving, what is professional development is this department giving. And often as a staff member, you would look at the list and say, those are competing, I can't go to everything. But approaching it more holistically by saying, what's the LCS way and what do we need for LCS staff, and providing certain staff with certain professional development. And it might be over a multi-year period. It might be new staff are introduced to this. And things like the approach to dealing with behavior, whether it's restorative practices being one of those approaches, are things that we want to build into as being consistent practices across the division.
Ms. Evans?
I just am so glad to see the non-Medicaid dependent piece in here.
Yeah.
I don't think that's going to change, and I think it's going to get harder and harder to get kids qualified, and we need it. So I'm very glad to see that.
Dr. Nilles?
Can you speak to, I know, for example, with transportation, with the bus drivers, that a lot of this bringing people up, bus drivers to full-time, really is an efficiency. It doesn't look like it necessarily, but it's really
It is.
an efficiency issue. And I know with regards to, hiring bus drivers and retaining them, and there's also the issue with substitutes, retaining middle school principals, and this isn't, there's a lot of real concrete issues that the school division has dealt with for many years, and this is a step toward, I think, addressing those. And I think if you could kind of elaborate on that a little.
Sure. With the bus drivers specifically, one of the things that we looked at when we talk about retaining staff is if you have a 6-hour position and then you're looking for additional hours that may or may not be there, depending upon what the needs are. By adding more 8-hour positions, we hope we've made it a little more attractive for folks. It's a little bit more money. There's a little bit more stability in terms of just providing the VRS, because we really do want to retain our staff. We want to attract quality staff. We want to retain our staff. So that was one area. We also have found ourselves in the position for where, with the lack of bus drivers and with the schedule and with our kids being as phenomenal as they are, but they are, as I said, they are into a lot. So we are moving kids all day long. There was a need to just have people move kids. And much of that was done through overtime because we just weren't set up in a system that was different. So part of this is when you increase the number of 8-hour positions, you also decrease the opportunity for overtime, and that's not an easy thing for all of my staff, and I recognize that, and we had a a 4 hour meeting with the bus drivers and the transportation staff to really talk about this. And it's difficult because you want to make sure your staff can take care of their family, but we're also an organization. As you said, Dr. Nillis, you know, the primary function is to make sure that we're operating efficiently. So we try to really create more opportunities while also looking at our spending on overtime, you know, in some cases time and a half, to say, is there a better model that can still transport students all over where they're going at multiple times during the day while also meeting the needs of, here are some full-time positions with benefits that we think are viable for you. And I will say that, you know, for some, we made them happy, for some, not so much. Those are the tough decisions that you have to make. But inherent to this was really looking at the amount of money that we spent on overtime and decreasing the amount of money that we did that, so.
Dr. Gupta?
Yeah, I have, is my mic, its audio is on. So I have two questions. I support Dr. Coleman's idea of having some development opportunities for restorative justice, but also have we looked at bringing in best practices in terms of reducing the achievement gap and training our teachers and administrators in terms of following those best practices so we can reduce the achievement gap in our schools going forward? That's my question number one. I'll come to question number two after this.
Achievement gap. If you remember this year, we did a focus on reading. We actually shared with you some of the strategies that I believe Lincoln Elementary and Bass Elementary had shared with their teachers, and there was a comment made by a community member, you need to be sharing best practices across schools, and we have definitely put that in place and begun to do that. We also had consultants here for elementary. We had consultants here that worked with our middle school. As a group, we had 4 what we call lab schools, literacy appreciation buildings, actually 5. Perrymont, Karen Nelson made sure that her building joined in. And those 5 schools worked on best practices for literacy instruction, reading, writing, and a balanced literacy program. And that was across grade levels, across schools, teachers, and mixed groups, while also having these consultants work directly in classrooms with teachers, with the kids that they have, which is, you know, most teachers will tell you that's a much better model than me going to a professional workshop, seeing someone do it, and then trying to come back in my classroom. It goes a long way when you have someone who can work with the children that you have in your class. The same thing occurred at the middle school. So all of that is to look at closing the achievement gaps, closing the learning gaps. And that's specifically focused in reading. We did some work in math too. And I would be remiss if I did not say that during this time, during the COVID time, where our children aren't with us, that we even now are looking at ways to say, yes, we're developing some online curriculum. We've had some packet work, but we're also looking at how do we have some family connect resources, because I have some children that I know I need to reach out to and make sure that that gap, you know, we're trying to reduce the gap, not increase the gap during this time. So we recognize that there's work that has to be done there too.
Dr. Gupta, you had
Yes, and I like the idea of creating a differential pay for middle school principals. But in the same line, if you see the issues, behavior issues in middle schools and high schools are going up or year after year. So has there been thought given to creating a differential pay for middle school and high school teachers in our system?
Thought to giving a differential and then you dropped off.
For our school and high school teachers, because there's a lot more expected out of them other than teaching in the classroom because of behavior issues, you know, the other things which are not related to the direct instruction.
The question was, have we looked at differential pay for middle school and high school teachers?
Like hard duty allowances from companies pay.
We have not looked at that. As you know, all of our teachers are on the way our pay scale works for our instructional staff, for our teaching staff, it's based on years of experience. So we have not done any kind of studies to the degree of what you're talking about and paying differential pay for different teachers at middle and high school levels. Some of that is unpredictable. You never know from one year to the next, or even from one period to the next, who's in your classroom. It's very kid dependent in terms of the management of students, what they bring to the classroom, the amount of adults in their lives that have set them up for success. So some of that is difficult to just say that, you know, next year I know you're going to have a class or students at XYZ, and therefore you're going to get differential pay versus you didn't have that last year.
I can go.
Dr. Coleman?
Kind of piggybacking on what Dr. Gupta was raising, I'm assuming between the two questions. All I want to know is very simple response, because I have complete confidence in the individuals who have done the behind-the-scenes work. I'm assuming the Finance Committee has been filtered through in whatever way and giving the public an opportunity to weigh in. I've seen some of the emails that are coming in. All I want to know, first of all, toxicity at the elementary level, I do want to say that is huge. So those elementary teachers are dealing with a whole lot. And in terms of what we would do there, Dr. Gupta, we might want to include that group in as well, because that's a huge piece of it going forward. But what I do want to know, and I keep making these statements year after year, when it comes to the limited dollars that we have, unfunded mandates, all of these requirements with money, you start talking about money. I know that these problems can't always be resolved with money, but do you feel that this budget is taking the best dollars that you do have to help us deal with the equity issues and whatever we need to do with the opportunity achievement gap, particularly in light of COVID-19? You've already stated that, so I don't need you to restate it, but I know there are a lot of people who are very concerned about year after year, and I want to thank School Board Member Bell Evans and even maybe Kim Sinha in the last meeting that wanted to suggest that we have made some progress. I looked at it, and we have. Mm-hmm. But I do want you to know that some folk, that's not enough. And so what do you want to say about that?
I will say what any superintendent would say. If you gave me more money, I would do more. And let's talk a little bit about restorative practices and restorative justice and setting it up for success. We hear that term a lot, but what we don't talk about is that for those programs to be successful, they are very people intensive. So imagine a student who's been out for whatever reason that is behavior driven, and this student is now coming back to school to be successful. In a great restorative practice, you have a circle, you have individuals who have all the time to sit down with that child and his family and make those connections and talk about what are we going to do to be successful. I'm in your corner. And those things aren't limited to, oh my goodness, the bell's about to ring, I got to go because I have to teach a class. So it's not something that you can assign to a teacher and say you're on this committee for 50 minutes and then you're off. Where I've seen it work is that you do have people who have that flexible schedule. That's all they do. They have the ability to visit students' homes. They have the ability to talk, if it's a half an hour or if it's 3 hours, whatever the kids and the families need, to really try to get to some of those deep-rooted concerns that some of our kids demonstrate. The other part of this is the part that we haven't really talked about, and it's an area that, you know, schools aren't the strongest equipped with dealing with mental health, significant mental health issues. Behavior, yes. Mental health is a whole nother realm that, you know, we have professional clinicians that this is their business. Teachers, we take a course or two maybe max. It's not our business. So when you talk about what I really need, if we really are addressing the significant mental health issues, I need true clinicians who get paid the amount of dollars that real professionals do. That's not school assistant money. that they get. I mean, if I'm being honest with you in terms of what would work. But that being said, we are moving, and you know, I'm always looking at, are we moving in a direction where we are setting our school up for success? We are really putting the people in place with the resources that we do have. We also have to recognize that the world is not static. So as we're moving forward and we become more equipped to address some of these things, society is still happening. Poverty is still happening. Kids are still suffering that, and they're bringing that to school, and in more and more and more droves. You remember this year, we're now a full CEP division. Everybody's getting free and reduced lunch. And that's not because, wow, look at us, we're much more well off now. No, we really are qualifying for more and more services. Our students and families need more support. That comes into the schools. So the children are variables that every year, that variable may change for us and what we have to deal with. But we're up for the challenge, I think, with what we have with flat funding. Let me say that one more time, flat funding. I think we have a great plan. Are we going to be able to do flat funding year after year after year? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. At some point, we're going to have to say there's got to be an investment in our schools, in our staff, that goes beyond just flat funding. So.
Thank you for your response, Dr. Edwards. I appreciate it. It's very real, and I hope everyone's listening in terms of the support that we will need. And Dr. Gupta, thank you for what you brought up. And it is going to require us to take a deeper look in the resources of our community, whether it be our colleges that we might not have always looked at to be able to help with some of these dynamics, whether it be Virginia University or Lynchburg or any of our other entities. This is going to be a year where community development and utilization is going to be huge.
Yeah.
Dr. Brennan has a question.
Dr. Brennan?
Yes, I just had a comment, which is to say that I know that the administration has been working on this budget since early last fall, and I really think it's a remarkable list of items that cover both academics and the arts and social emotional issues and try to address issues with the bus drivers and transportation. And I think, and also match the governor's match, which looks like that's about $2 million right there to do under that, all under flat funding from the city is really a remarkable job. And I want to thank the administration for that. And also as one piece on this, I also want to thank for the 2 additional seats at the governor's school, which I know has been an issue for the public and was mentioned at public comments. I know will be appreciated also, but thank you so much for this, for the work that went into this. And it's remarkable this is done under flat funding from the city.
Thank you. Any additional questions or comments? I just wanted to say one thing. I'm really glad to see that we're instituting a tuition reimbursement.
Yes, I forgot
for
to mention
all
that.
staff. I mean, that to me is very huge.
I forgot to mention it, and it was the one thing that I kept working with my staff, like, you have to give me something that can be a perk that my staff can say, hey, can I get a little assistance here? So yes, we are happy to have that in there, and I really thank my entire team for helping us get that in there.
Any additional questions?
Not at this time. No, I guess I do appreciate, it's clear there's a great deal of effort that goes into this, and I appreciate your budgeting process from previous
Yes.
It's
administrations.
not the time to cough.
There's a lot. No, there's a lot more detail. I think clarity, at least from a board perspective, into the materials that are being presented. So, thank you.
Thank you. Thank Kim also for her insights, obviously, in this process going forward. Madam Chair, the community, in terms of their interaction, we'll just simply try to filter through all of that as we go forward, correct? What I'm speaking of.
I don't understand what you're
Yes,
asking.
ma'am. What I'm saying is that there were no persons that came forward tonight as such for the public hearing, but we're continuously listening to and responding to individuals who may have concerns.
Yes. All right, that concludes, if there are no more questions, that concludes the budget presentation part of the agenda, which takes us, thank you, Dr. Edwards, and thank you, Mrs. Laconich. Thank you. That takes us to the public hearing part of the agenda. The Lynchburg City School Board previously held a public hearing on the proposed school operating budget in October, and this was the opportunity for tonight to have public comments. There were none who signed up tonight, so we will move on to the next part of this agenda. As always, if people want to email us their questions or support, they can do that through our email, school email. All right, that now takes us to item 4 on the agenda, which is the superintendent recommends that the school board receive and approve the fiscal year's 2020-21 school operating budget. Questions and discussions? Dr. Coleman.
Yes, I'm not a member of the Finance Committee, and I know that there are members of the Finance Committee that are present. I do recall last year that there were some thoughts about the involvement of the Finance Committee in this process, and obviously the superintendent has been true to what she promised in terms of the philosophy of the budget and how it's being presented. But I just wanted to ask the members of the Finance Committee, is everyone comfortable?
Well, anyone have questions? Dr. Nilles.
When do you need approval before presenting to the city?
Well, we have an April 1st that our numbers have to be into the state. If you remember last year, we did an approval in December, then we had to come back and actually approve after the city council approved in June. So this approval that you're doing right now is so that Kim can do her work and get the budget using the calc tool and update everything like that going forward. But remember, the governor still hasn't approved the budget, the city still hasn't approved, so we'll have to come back and actually do that. So what I'm asking for tonight is just so we can move forward and at least get the numbers in.
Yes. Dr. Gupta?
Chair, are you looking for a motion to approve the budget, or
Yes.
I move that we approve the budget?
Second?
We have a motion from Dr. Gupta and a second from Dr. Coleman to approve the budget as presented. Any further discussion? Dr. Nilles?
What's the time calendar for the budget process as you currently understand it? That you submit it to numbers to the state tomorrow?
By April 1st, yes. And then as I had asked the city if I could come and present on April 14th, I have to get confirmation of that. We are still waiting for the governor, I think that's April 20th or 22nd, that there should be some movement on that, and then we have to wait for the city. And once the city approves, it's usually the city that's the later one, once the city approves, then we bring it back to the board, which I believe last year we did in June. And then we put our budget book together, post online that it's been an approved budget. We can't post online that it's approved budget until we are sure about our revenues.
Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Dr. Gupta has another question.
Dr. Gupta?
Make a comment if the people who are watching or in the community should see, under even tight budget constraints, we have been able to do a lot of good things in the past year. We had new gymnasiums, we've been able to upgrade our transport system. We'd love to have, as Dr. Brennan says, a emission-free system, but we're still improving. So I thank Ms. Kim and Dr. Copeland for working together to make it happen. Thank you.
Okay, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion or question? Are we ready to vote? We have to do a roll call vote for this. Ms. Evans?
Yes.
Dr. Coleman?
Yes.
Ms. Morrison, yes. Dr. Nilles?
Yes.
Ms. Carter?
Yes.
Dr. Gupta?
Yes.
Dr. Sinha?
Yes.
Dr. Brennan?
Yes.
All right, so the motion has been passed unanimously by the board.
Very good.
All right, now that then takes us to additional comments. We want to keep these brief. So it was on the agenda. If anybody, I too would like to echo Dr. Edwards' comments earlier. Appreciation to all our staff for getting together the materials, getting on the buses, greeting the kids from afar, It's been a remarkable experience for the members of this community, and everywhere I go, I get comments about what a powerful message that we're sending. And the teachers are working hard this week to get the classrooms up and running online. I think they've been Zooming all week, so we're just really appreciative. Dr. Gupta?
I wanted to echo what you're saying. On top of that, I'd like to thank all the healthcare workers, including Dr. Brennan, who are in the front line. We are lucky to have our Dr. Fauci in Lynchburg is Dr. Brennan. He's the key leading infectious disease guy and who's part of our LCS board. So on behalf of, I can say our LCS community, we're grateful and thank you for your service, Dr. Brennan.
Everyone stay healthy and stay distant. Dr. Brennan?
So, Dr. Gupta, thank you so much for that nice comment. I think the closest thing Dr. Fauci and I have a relationship is our age is probably the only thing we really share, but I'm thrilled to be in the same sentence with him. I have a question related to the Legislative Advocacy Committee and the budget. We discussed in the past whether it be advantageous for members of the committee or members of the board to meet individually with city council members between now and whenever there is a date to present the budget. Does the board and the administration think that would be helpful, and should we pursue that to try to set meetings up with board members, and would board members be interested in doing that?
I think it would be helpful, and if people are interested or able to do it, then we could work that out through email.
You know, any support that we get
Yes.
is always good support, so I'm going to say yes.
Yes. Thank you, Dr. Brennan.
Thank you.
All right, that now concludes our work session. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you in a couple of weeks. Next week.
Oh, it is next week, isn't it? Yes.